So, David, I wanted to start with the fact that I have really been loving cognitive behavioral therapy. And I see it, it seems like there's a resurgence or something going on with it because, like, I'm just reading this book by Jonathan Haidt out of UPenn, The Coddling of the American Mind. And so much of it is about using cognitive behavioral therapy and not getting sucked into these distortion way of thinking and everything. Now, originally it was created, from what I read, it was created by Beck and Ellis, right? But you were also a pioneer sort of in that genesis of CBT?
Yes, I was, Ellis had done a lot of it in the 1950s, and then Beck picked up on it in the 60s. Just, I don't know, he created his Beck Depression Inventory in 1964 or 5. But I jumped onto his weekly seminar at Penn when there were probably maybe 8 or 10 cognitive therapists in the world, and he was just developing it. And I was supposed to stay on the Penn Medical School faculty, and I had a grant to do a brain serotonin research laboratory working on that chemical imbalance theory. And I just knew that that was a false theory. Our research kind of proved it was a false theory. And all the drugs I was giving out didn't seem to be doing much for people, all the antidepressants. And I heard about his seminar and began to go once a week just to prove to myself that it was a kind of a silly theory that couldn't really help anyone, that the idea that was depression is due to negative thoughts and could be cured by helping people change the way they think, that didn't seem realistic. I knew people had negative thoughts, but I didn't think you could talk people out of depression by working with their negative thoughts. And then my patients began to really get better quickly, and they really liked these new techniques. So I just gave up my academic appointment and went into private practice instead and began developing cognitive therapy. And I wrote my book, Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy, which came out in 1980. And that kind of helped put cognitive therapy on the map around the world. And then recently, say in the last 20 years or so, we finally made it back home to California, which is a fantastic gift from God, I would say. We just love it in California, always have. And I have a weekly psychotherapy training and development group at Stanford. We'll be meeting tonight, for example, from 5 to 7, and it's free to Bay Area mental health professionals. They can come and get training in cognitive therapy. And then we've developed a new twist on the thing that we call team CBT. That's kind of like cognitive therapy on steroids. And the new techniques lead to ultra rapid recovery. And I think the new things we've developed are probably as big a breakthrough as cognitive therapy was back in the 1970s and early 1980s.
Did your life change radically when you published Feeling Good? Like, was that like a blockbuster hit and all of a sudden
when it came out, it was almost impossible to get it published because everyone thought it was going to be a loser book. And I had an agent who couldn't get anyone even to reject it. People were so uninterested. It was just sitting on the floor at HarperCollins with probably in a stack of 200 books nobody had looked at. And I finally, through the gift of gab, managed to get William Morrow and Company and Maria Guarna Shelley, who was my editor, to publish it. And right after it was published, she told me that most of their books, 90% of their books, lose money. And they're looking for that 1 in 10 that'll make money. So they determined ahead of time, the president has a list of the loser books that what they felt were not worth investing in. And she said my book was the #1 book on the loser list, and that they wouldn't do anything to promote her. And I had to try to do it on my own. And it took me 8 years before it finally went to the top of the bestseller lists. And but it would sell out. They'd print a few thousand more. It would sell out. They'd print a few thousand more. It'd sell out. And it was it was it was an overnight success, but it was 8 years working up to the day it became an overnight success. Right. And that did have quite an impact on my career. But the whole time, I mean, I was doing pretty much the same thing. I was seeing patients. I was loving cognitive therapy. I was trying to, figure out how to make it more and more powerful. I developed, 50, 100 techniques to crush these distorted thoughts that cause depression and anxiety. And I began doing research also on how does psychotherapy really work, and why is it that some people don't respond to any form of treatment, no matter how clever it is. Because I thought if I could solve that problem, then we could develop an even more mind-blowing form of therapy for depression and anxiety. And I think I did find the solution to that problem. It was a problem that Freud tried to solve but couldn't. He called it therapeutic resistance. And he devoted his life to figuring out why some people seem to resist change. But he never came up with anything that was worth anything. He just thought you were supposed to lie on the couch for 5 years and psychoanalyze, free associate, and somehow you'd get over your resistance. But we think, what the true cause of resistance. And along with my colleagues at Stanford, we've developed really fun, neat, exciting new techniques that we can eliminate someone's resistance in as little now as 20 or 30 minutes, often the very first time we meet with someone. And then once we've done that, they generally can recover in as little as 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. The resistance to change was a huge factor that nobody hardly has been taking into account. People keep creating new clever forms of psychotherapy that they try to sell to patients, but nobody's been saying, well, how about the people who aren't buyers? Why are they fighting therapists? Why are they fighting change? And that has been a truly mind-boggling thing to solve and to see what happens once you've got it solved.
That's partly the new thing that's in your new book.
Yeah, Feeling Great. That's why I wrote Feeling Great. My publishers wanted me to redo Feeling Good, although it's still a bestseller. In fact, that and Feeling Great are constantly competing on Amazon for the number one bestseller position in the depression category. But I looked at Feeling Good. I hadn't looked at it for 40 years since it was published. And I said, I'm not going to revise this book. It's perfect the way it is. It's still curing people who read it. It's beautifully written. It's everything is like just beautifully woven together. It would be criminal to try to change that book. It's going to still be good 1,000 years from now. But I've got so much new stuff. Let's write a new book. That's why I wrote Feeling Great. So
give just like a 2-minute synopsis of what is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Well, that's a really fun thing. There's 3 basic ideas to it, and they're all simple. They sound simple, but they're very powerful. The first goes back 2,000 years to the Greek philosopher Epictetus, and he said people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. In other words, our thoughts about what's happening create our emotions. Like right now, I'm thinking, gosh, this is kind of fun. This is going to be a fun hour. This guy I'm talking to is interviewing me. He seems like really a good guy, and gee, I'm lucky to have this chance. This is going to be great. So I feel happy. Now, someone listening right now, they could be having different thoughts. They could be thinking, gosh, this Burns sounds like a quack. He sounds like an ass. He's probably arrogant and so they're feeling annoyed, and then someone else could be thinking, wow, that he's got something new. You can recover really quickly now from depression. This is exciting. So the person who's thinking that, they're feeling happy. See, everyone's hearing exactly the same words, but everyone has different emotions depending on your thoughts. And that's that first idea. Your thoughts create all of your emotions in the here and now. And that's really been known since the time of Buddha, actually, 2,500 years ago. But it's such a basic idea, most people can't get it. Even the people hearing the show right now, they heard me say it, but they don't know what it means. My thoughts create my emotions. What does that mean? People think, but it's very easy. You have thoughts. You're telling yourself things, and that's the entire and only cause of all of your emotions. And if you're depressed, you're giving yourself negative messages. I'm a loser. What's wrong with me? I shouldn't have screwed up. Why am I so anxious in social situations? There must be something wrong with me. When I give that talk at work, I just know I'm going to blow it. I'll screw up. People are going to judge me. I'm going to look nervous. I'll look like a fool. All these, I'll never get better. I'm going to be depressed forever. I'm a hopeless case. These are the kind of thoughts that people who are depressed and anxious have, and those thoughts are the total cause of the depression. That's the first idea. And it's not a chemical imbalance in your brain. It's not your childhood. It's not your genes, although all those things might have background influences, but it's what you're thinking right now. Now, the second idea is that depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cons. This is new. Epictetus, 2,000 years ago, he didn't figure out this part of it. But it's like when you tell yourself, I'm a loser, I'll be alone forever, I'm unlovable, I'm a failure, you're involved in these subtle thinking errors that you don't realize, like all or nothing thinking. If I'm not a complete success, I'm a failure. Or overgeneralization. My boyfriend rejected me. This means I'm unlovable. A young woman told me that just recently, and she was very depressed, and she was saying, I'll be alone forever. See, that's overgeneralizing from a negative event. I broke up with my boyfriend, or he broke up with me, however you want to put it. Then she thinks she has a self that's unlovable. That's an overgeneralization. And without overgeneralization, depression is impossible. And the Buddha knew this really in a way 2,500 years ago. He said that nothing on the surface of the earth could possibly cause depression. You could be disappointed if your paper isn't accepted for publication, or sad if a loved one dies. But depression only exists in the clouds of abstraction, like I'm a loser, I'll be alone forever, there's something wrong with me, all this vague talk. And there's 10 of those thinking errors. There's, mental filtering. Depressed patients are like they're drunk with negativity, and they pick out everything that's wrong with you, and your environment. You're like a horse with blinders. You see all of your faults, and then discounting the positive. You say your positive qualities don't count. I was eventually I started to get on some TV shows that once the book became well known, started selling, and I got to do a little morning TV show in Cincinnati with a really nice guy. He had a live audience, and it was an hour show, and I was the guest on the show. He had a band and everything, and it was really cool. And we talked about depression and anxiety. And then at the end, he said, I think I need a little, I need a little shrink session right now. And I said, well, sure, I'll be glad to help you out. What is it? And he says, well, after every show, I got roughly 300 fan letters. And this was in the time before emails. I'm dating myself a little bit here. But he said, there 299 will be glowing with praise, and I'll get one mean-spirited critical letter. And then I think about that one all day long and make myself miserable as if that 290 didn't count. And that's mental filtering and discounting the positive. You make yourself miserable that way. And there's a lot of other thinking errors. Should statements. I shouldn't have screwed up. Self-blame, where you blame yourself for all kinds of things you weren't maybe even entirely responsible for. And emotional reasoning. I feel like a loser, so I must be one. I feel hopeless, so I must be hopeless. Reasoning from how you feel. And that's not valid because your feelings are created by your thoughts. And if your thoughts are distorted and illogical, your feelings will not reflect reality any more than when you look into a curved mirror in the fun house at an amusement park and you see these weird images of yourself. That's what emotional reasoning is. You're seeing a grotesque view of yourself, vision of yourself that isn't at all valid. But the thing is that when you're depressed, you don't know that you're fooling yourself in this way. You're just so sure that these thoughts and feelings are true. It's obvious to you is the fact that there's skin on your hands, and it's horrible. It's the worst form of suffering. A young woman told me, that she was feeling hopeless and convinced that she could never recover. And hopelessness is the biggest fraud of all in depression. Because people who are depressed are never, ever hopeless. It's the only thing that can never be true about your feelings. They're constantly changing your emotions. You can't keep your feelings at any one place or level. But she told me that when she would go to bed every night, she would pray to God to give her terminal cancer so she could die in dignity without having to commit suicide and shame her parents. And so, although these thoughts are cons and distorted, you don't know it when you're depressed. You think you really are this bad, horrible, worthless human being. And I know how real it is. I've experienced it on occasion myself. And I've had over 40,000 therapy sessions with people who were in this trap. And then the final idea, the first is your thoughts create your feelings. Second, those thoughts will always be distorted and illogical. You're involved in thinking errors. You don't realize what you're doing to yourself. And then the final thing, the very moment you change the way you think and you suddenly discover that thought is not valid, in that very moment you can change the way you feel. So that's the three basic ideas of cognitive therapy, and it really changed the history of psychotherapy and psychology in the 1970s and early 1980s when people first became aware of cognitive therapy. And at first people were very resistant to the idea, and there weren't many of us doing it, and psychiatrists, psychologists for the most part thought we were quacks. And then after Feeling Good came out and started spreading and selling eventually like crazy in the United States and throughout the world, now cognitive therapy is the most popular form of psychotherapy in human history and the most researched. But now that everyone's finally catching on and accepting cognitive therapy, I'm trying to say, hey, folks, we got something better now. Don't get so married to the old-fashioned cognitive therapy. But it's now they're fighting the new, and now that what used to be, quackery has now become mainstream, and it's certainly very good cognitive therapy, but there are certain limitations to it, and that's why we've developed some new angles.
Right, and I want to get to those new angles in a second. I want to touch upon a couple different things first. First is the double standard technique.
Yeah,
is wonderful, and for people who don't know that, essentially it's the idea of when we are talking to ourselves in a judgmental, negative way, the idea is to ask yourself if a good friend would be talking to you basically in the same way. Well, can you explain a little bit about it? Because I think it's such a great and a very simple technique that anybody can use very quickly, just in your own head, not even really needing a therapist, basically.
Yeah. Well, you said it really well. We most of us operate on a double standard. When we screw up, we beat up on ourselves ruthlessly. I shouldn't have made that mistake, and we dwell on our mistake and give ourselves all kinds of critical messages. I'm a loser, and I shouldn't have done that, and blah blah blah, whatever it is. And if you were talking to a friend who was exactly like you, with exactly the same problem, you'd talk to that person in a loving, compassionate way. Uh, and the double standard technique means, would you be willing to talk to yourself the way you'd talk to a dear friend? And it's just one of dozens of techniques, but it's easy to understand and easy to do, and often effective. At my hospital in Philadelphia, we transformed. I was at an inner city hospital and Presbyterian Medical Center, and we served. It was a kind of a gang warfare, drug type of area, dangerous area. And we created a large cognitive therapy program for all the people there in our neighborhood. And we outlawed individual psychotherapy, and we treated everyone with the ideas in my book, Feeling Good, in groups. And it was very powerful and very healing to these people. But like, I remember in one group there was a woman who the nurses told me that they knew her, and she was a wonderful mother, but she's very self-critical, and that this was her second hospitalization for depression, and that she was kind of beating up on herself. And so in the group, I asked if anyone, there were about 13 patients in the group, did anyone want any help? And she raised her hand, and she told me her negative thoughts, that she was saying, my children feel abandoned, and I'm a weak person because I allowed myself to get depressed again, and I'm a bad mother. And I knew from the nursing staff that that her husband was taking care of the children, and they're doing well, and just these are just not true, fair thoughts. And so I told her, imagine that there's another woman here in the group who's just like you. She looks like you. She's your age. She has the same background as you, the same strengths as you, the same weaknesses as you, and she's just been hospitalized for the second time for severe depression. So I want you to turn to her now. Imagine she's sitting here in this chair, and say to her what you're saying to yourself. Tell her, you're a bad mother. Your children feel abandoned. You're weak. You never should have let yourself get depressed again. This is all your fault. Just say those things to her now. She turned to the chair and she said, well, Dr. Burns, I don't think I can say those things to someone. And I said, why not? And she said, well, because it's cruel to say things like that. I said, well, sure, that's one thing, but you told me all your negative thoughts are 100% true. And that's the thing, by the way, about depression and anxiety. You'll always think these distorted thoughts are true. And so I said, since they're true, you have to be honest with people. So tell her, your children feel abandoned. You shouldn't have been so weak. You should have been strong. You're a bad mother. She says, I still can't say those things. I said, why not? And she said, well, Well, actually, my husband's taking care of the kids, and they're doing fine. and, then, so is that what you tell this woman? She said, yeah, tell her your children love you and they're being taken care of, and it's not your fault. You're not weak because you have depression. This is an illness, and you're doing the right thing to be hospitalized to get some help. And it's ridiculous to say you're a bad mother. I would say you're a very loving mother. And then I said, and do you believe what you're saying to this other woman? Say, oh yes, that's absolutely true. And then I said, well, if it's true of her, it must be true of you because she's identical to you. Would you be willing to talk to yourself like that in a loving way rather than this harsh way? She says, are you allowed to do that? It's like she'd never thought of that before. Most of us haven't. And I said, yes, absolutely. Talk to yourself like that right now and tell me how you feel. And she said, my depression just disappeared. She says, this is like a miracle. And I gave her a depression test again. It only took about 20 minutes in her case. And she went from suicidally depressed, extreme depression, to no depression at all in like 20 minutes using that technique. Now, it's not always that easy. That's an example, a very dramatic example. Sometimes it's another technique that will work. Maybe the double standard won't work. And then we have all these new methods too for people who are resistant and oppositional and kind of stuck in depression. But it just makes me so happy when that happens. And of course, then in the group, this was like a 2.5-hour group I was leading. And all of a sudden, all the other patients, they see someone recover before their very eyes. And then instead of resisting and fighting, they say, hey, I want that too. Will you do that for me? Will you do that for me? And it becomes such a rewarding thing to see people recovering rapidly right before your eyes. And that's kind of what I've devoted my life to. And that's why I left this psychopharmacology thing, giving out pills and pills and pills. Sometimes pills can be life-saving or life-changing, but almost well over 90% of the time, people with depression and anxiety now can recover quickly without lengthy therapy and without medications. And I just think that's fantastic news.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. One of the things that I notice when I was reviewing your book is you kind of check in with the clients, asking them, is this true? Right? So do you really believe this, or is this just kind of bullshit? And I think that's important because there might be a person out there in podcast land that's listening to this going, oh, frick, I don't want freaking positive thinking and all that. But
you're quoting the Buddha there.
Oh, yeah?
Frickin' positive thinking. I've always been against that kind of bullshit myself. Positive affirmations. I think anyone who tries to treat depression with positive thinking or positive affirmation should have their license revoked.
Yeah, and I think the core, at least the way you describe CBT in your book, part of it, it's really about part of it is about identifying the distorted thinking and replacing it with more realistic thinking and more thinking that is more accurate to reality rather than this distorted thoughts that are distorted toward the negative, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it, and it's really pretty simple, but it's hard to get at first. It's hard to grasp at first, and particularly when you're depressed, it's hard for you to believe that these negative thoughts, are not true. To give you just an extreme example of it, because there's all different ways people distort their thoughts, but when people have panic attacks, which is the worst form of anxiety, they generally are telling themselves during the panic attack, I'm about to die of a heart attack, or my windpipe is closing off, I'm on the verge of death, or I'm dizzy, I must be on the verge of going crazy. And they believe those thoughts 100%, and they feel intense terror. And then after 30 minutes or so, the panic attack kind of dissipates and leaves the person feeling bewildered and terrified that this horrible thing is going to happen to them again. And then they get often into a cycle where they're having maybe 5 of these panic attacks every week. And it's debilitating. But do you see, this is again a distortion, another distortion, magnification and minimization. Like the person who thinks they're going to die during a panic attack, they're generally hyperventilating because they're upset about something. So they're going, then their chest gets tight and they get tingling in their fingers and the chest starts hurting and they say, oh, I'm about to die, I'm about to have a heart attack. And they believe that. And yet it's totally untrue. And so I did a workshop last week for mental health professionals and showed a video of a woman who'd had 10 years of failed therapy for horrible panic attacks, every time telling herself, I'm about to die, every time she has a panic attack. So I induced a panic attack in the office with her permission. And then when she started sobbing, I had her hyperventilate and said, imagine that your windpipe is closing off and you're on the verge of a heart attack. And she started sobbing and begging for me to stop. She says, Dr. Burns, I'm about to die. Please, I can't go on. And then I said, if you were about to die, could you stand up right now and do strenuous aerobic exercises? And she says, oh, no, I can't. If I stand up, I know I'm going to pass out. I said, well, let's do an experiment. Let's stand up and let's see if you pass out. Of course, I knew she couldn't pass out because her heart is beating fast and her blood pressure is elevated. You only faint when your heart slows down and your blood pressure falls. So she stood up and then I said, now start running in place. And she starts running real slow. Please, Dr. Burns, I'm about to die. I can't get enough oxygen. And I said, well, run faster then. So she starts running faster. And then after a minute or so, she said, please, Dr. Burns, I'm about to die. I can't go on. I said, well, do some jumping jacks then. And she said, oh, no, I'll die if I do a jumping jack. I said, well, do jumping jacks anyway. And so she did jumping jacks. And about 15 seconds into it, she said, I wonder if I could do this if I was having a heart attack. And then I said, is this what you see in the emergency rooms of hospitals? Patients with massive heart attacks standing next to their gurneys doing jumping jacks. And when I said that, she suddenly saw it wasn't true that she was on the verge of a heart attack. And her sobbing, she went into uncontrollable laughter and bent over. And then when she straightened back up, she was laughing. I said, you do some more jumping jacks. I'm sure you'll pass out at any moment. And she started laughing uncontrollably again. And that ended 10 years of horrific failed therapy for panic disorder and severe depression. And it took less than 6 minutes. And that was 30 years ago, because I have to call her and keep saying, oh, can I still keep showing this video from that session? And she always graciously says, yeah, go for it. But that's another example. See, her thinking error was fortune telling and magnification, predicting something extremely unrealistic, and then exaggerating the importance of the symptoms. Most of us get dizzy, but we don't tell ourselves I'm on the verge of death or I'm on the verge of going crazy. And so that's how the therapy works. But everyone has some different error that they're making in their thinking, and so people respond to different kinds of techniques. But it's just fun to be able to deliver high-speed recovery to people who have what appear to be severe and chronic problems, and then see them get better right before your very eyes. It's just the most exciting thing in the world to me.
And you're claiming that 100% of the time, or close to it, depression is caused by distorted thinking.
Yeah, I'd say 100% of the time.
100%.
Now, depression is not the same as healthy sadness. Healthy sadness is caused by negative thoughts, but valid thoughts, undistorted thoughts. Like if a loved one dies or a beloved pet dies, you grieve, tears come to your eyes, and you're telling yourself, I love my dog, I love my cat, I love my mom, the person who died, and I'll miss that person or that pet, and you think of how much you love them, and those are healthy feelings. That's not something you'd want to treat with Prozac or Xanax or anything like that. Grieving is a part of life. But when you're depressed, then you're telling yourself that you're not good enough, or that you're no good, and that things will never change, uh, and that you're worthless, or you're inferior, or that you should be better than you are. And those will 100% of the time be distorted thoughts.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple questions. The name of this podcast is Truth Junkie, and I always try to put me going after the truth above my comfort or seeking approval from any guests. So I want to ask you a couple questions. First question is...
That's a great name, by the way, Truth Jockey. I love that.
Thanks. So one question I have is, Daniel Goleman wrote this book, Emotional Intelligence, and in it he talks about amygdala hijacking. And I want to get your take on that, because it seems like the CBT principle of thoughts always produce feelings, that the idea of amygdala hijacking, which is basically that sometimes these feelings are coming from a deeper part of the brain that actually bypasses the rational thinking part of the brain. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, two quick things. I'm indebted to him because he kind of helped me in the early days with feeling good, and asked me to write an article for Psychology Today that was the first little publicity I ever got for feeling good. And I wrote something called The Perfectionist Script for Self-Defeat, and it became the most read article in the history of Psychology Today. And so that helped me a little in the early days. So I certainly have fond thoughts for him. But I did a study in the Stanford Hospital with the daily cognitive therapy groups, where we're measuring negative thoughts and feelings in every person at the start and end of the group. So I could see changes in thoughts and changes in feelings. And then I was able to use a powerful form of mathematical modeling called structural equation modeling. And it allows you to answer questions that are thought to be insoluble, like what came first, the chicken or the egg? And I asked the question, what comes first, the thoughts or the feelings? Do negative thoughts cause negative feelings, the amygdala, all this emotional part of the brain, or do negative feelings trigger negative thoughts? And what the data showed, what the analyses showed, was that, as Epictetus claimed, negative thoughts have massive, almost instantaneous causal effects on negative feelings. All negative feelings result from negative thoughts. It's impossible to have a negative feeling without giving yourself some kind of negative message. But the data also confirmed a reverse causal pathway, that then when you start to feel anxious or frightened or depressed or worthless, that activates the circuits in the brain that manufacture negative thoughts, so you get more negative thoughts, so you go into kind of a vicious cycle. And so there's certainly much truth to the idea that once the amygdala gets activated, then you're going to have a lot of negative feelings. But the moment you see that the thoughts that trigger those feelings are not true, and you'll instantly be cured. And an example of that is you can imagine a cave person thousands of years ago sitting around the campfire at night and hearing this broken twig behind him and having the thought, my God, that could be a tiger. And he goes into a state, the most intense panic a human being can have. And then he turns his head and sees it was just his wife stepping on a stick. So he sees his thought was not valid, and the brain instantly changes and the anxiety disappears.
And in that example, though, at least, and this is maybe talking from my own experience, if I'm that caveman stepping on a twig or hearing the twig break behind me, that's so fast, consciously I don't think, oh shit, that's a tiger. It's just like sound, and then instantly there's this physiological reaction in my body. So isn't that an example of like stimulus and then feeling happening before the thought?
It could be. There could be a direct neural connection between the hearing and the amygdala. So that I have to say that's possible. There may be neural pathways just like that. These things are hard to research in a way, because our knowledge of how the brain works is still pretty primitive. There's a chapter in Feeling Great that might be of interest to people who are interested in brain function by Dr. Mark Noble. He's a prominent neuroscientist from the University of Rochester. And in his book, he's arguing that the team therapy that we've developed maps onto how the brain works and how the brain manufactures and changes negative feelings. But even there, the model he's created is partly speculative, because our knowledge of how the brain creates emotions, how the brain creates consciousness is still, our knowledge is very limited. People are eager to jump on a bandwagon of this or that is true, and MRI shows this, and brain scans show that. But I think that most of these discoveries are going to be happening in the future. We don't know really how the brain creates depression, how the brain creates happiness, how the brain creates fear, how the brain creates any positive or negative emotion. But we do know that thoughts have a massive role to play, and that you can change the way you feel when you change the way you think.
Right. And actually, to be fair, this example of the twig, stimulating a response with feelings, that's actually not a very practical example. People aren't coming into therapy saying, man, I wish I got startled less from twigs. They're coming into therapy going, fuck, I'm depressed or anxious. It's a longer term mood disorder, basically, or a mood issue that they're wanting help with.
I don't know. We've had a tremendous upsurge in twig phobias at Stanford in the past 6 months. Our cat, we adopt feral cats, and they're very sensitive to sound, for example. And there's probably an evolutionary, you hear a sound, go right to a startle reaction in cats, because they automatically, they jump. The more feral they are, the more they jump. And yet, once they come to trust us and become pets and kind of loving members of our household, they hear sounds that originally they would have interpreted as danger. They hear the same sound, and it's, they no longer make that interpretation, so they no longer have that startle reaction.
So I want to shift gears here. I want to talk about one of the big contributions of your new book, and that has to do with positive reframing of resistance.
Yeah.
And you talk about, so basically the idea, from what I understand, is 50%, about half of clients come in and they are resistant to having a positive, to benefiting from therapy, whether that's process resistance or outcome resistance. And I think the cool thing, I want you to talk a little bit about positive reframing because it's so awesome because it's actually looking at these negative emotions that we're having and finding how these negative emotions say something positive about you and actually give you benefit. So it's changing the relationship you're having with these negative emotions.
Yeah, this has been a huge thing, and if you told me this the first 7 years of my career, I would have said, "Ah, that sounds stupid. I'm not interested," because as a psychiatric resident, I was, and or had I been a psychologist, I would have been trained in the same thing. We're trained that when people are depressed and anxious, it's because there's something wrong with you. You have a chemical imbalance in your brain, or you have a you can I've got the DSM here up on the shelf. It's a big thick book, and you can find all that you have all of these mental disorders. uh, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or you're told that you have a personality defect, or something, and so you're struggling in shame because you've been depressed, or because you have panic attacks, or fears or phobias, or whatever. And we've kind of turned that upside down, and we're saying that your depression and anxiety are not because of what's wrong with you, but because of what's right with you. Because every negative feeling is an expression of what's most beautiful about you and your core values as a human being. And in addition, all negative feelings are very beneficial to you. And the paradox is, once the person sees all the great things about their symptoms, they paradoxically don't need them anymore, and it becomes really easy then to crush the negative thoughts and trigger rapid and profound recovery. A very simple and obvious example would be a woman I talk about in Feeling Great, who had been severely depressed for 9 years, because when her daughter was 12, she said, "Mommy, can I go out and play?" And Karen, the mother, had always said yes. Her daughter did that every night for years, went out and played after dinner. And so her daughter went outside, and some neighborhood boys snuck up on Karen's daughter, Ashley, with a high-powered pellet rifle, aimed it at her face from a foot away, and pulled the trigger. And the projectile hit one of her teeth, and the tooth kind of exploded, and there was a lot of damage to her mouth and face. She ran inside with blood gushing out of her mouth and screaming in fear and pain, and had multiple surgeries to correct the damage to her mouth and face. And then the daughter had been in treatment for her post-traumatic stress disorder for those 9 years. But Karen was coming for treatment because she had been depressed and anxious and ashamed that whole time, telling herself, "I never should have let her go out and play that night. I'm a bad mother. Um, it's my fault that her childhood was ruined. I can't allow myself to feel happy when my daughter is suffering." And I treated Karen in front of a live audience at one of my annual psychotherapy intensives I used to have every summer before COVID came, like a 4-day intensive. And the night of the first day of the workshop, I always treat someone live so they can see someone going from intense despair to joy in a single therapy session. Because when I tell people that, they don't believe me. They think I'm a con artist or a fraud. And when they see it happening, suddenly the audience turns and says, "Oh my God, this is possible. And this is amazing." And so one of the keys with Karen, before I helped her crush these distorted thoughts, "I'm a bad mother and it's all my fault," she's filled with distortions. Together, we listed, what are your negative thoughts and feelings show about you that's positive and awesome? Because, before we press a magic button and make it all disappear, we better make sure we know what we're doing, and maybe it's not such a good idea to get rid of your depression and your shame and your anxiety and your anger and your hopelessness and your defectiveness. And then, and I said to Karen, like, what do these symptoms show about you that's positive and awesome? Like, if we had a magic button, you press it, your depression will disappear and you'll feel euphoric finally after 9 years of suffering. But what does your depression show about you that's positive and awesome? And then Karen said, well, maybe it shows my love for my daughter. I say, exactly. See, your depression isn't due to a chemical imbalance in your brain. Your depression is due to the fact that you have a daughter who you love more than life itself, and your daughter's been suffering horribly for 9 years. And Karen says, yeah, you're right. And then what does it say about you when you say that you're a bad mother? And she says, well, maybe, and you feel guilt and shame. Well, maybe, Karen said, maybe it shows that I have high standards. So I said, add that to your list, high standards. Do you have high standards? She says, absolutely I do. Have your high standards motivated you to work hard and to, accomplish a lot? She says, oh, yeah, I got a PhD. I have a great career. I do every conceivable thing to help my daughter. What else does your guilt and shame and self-criticism show about you? And we added to the list. It shows that she's humble. And she is a very humble person. You're just attracted to her just talking to her. She's so warm. And then her suffering also shows her compassion. Shows that she really cares, and it shows that she's accountable rather than blaming others. She's saying, what did I do wrong? What's my role in the thing? And then what's awesome, Karen, about your defectiveness? You're feeling 90% defective on a scale from 0 to 100. What does that show? What's great about feeling defective? And then we came up, well, I guess it shows that I'm realistic because I have many flaws. I have many defects. And you're 90% angry. What's great about your anger? And she said, well, maybe it shows I have a moral compass because that was wrong. Those parents should never let those boys go out and play with a loaded rifle with other children. I said, yeah, your anger shows that you're a fighter. She says, I am. You're doing everything to protect your daughter. You're like a mama bear protecting the cubs. And on. We came up in about 20 minutes with 25 separate awesome things that Karen's symptoms showed about her. And then I said, well, Karen, if we press a magic button and all your symptoms disappear, all these beautiful things about you are going to disappear as well. Is that what you want? You want to press a magic button and be euphoric tonight? You want to be euphoric about the fact that your daughter's suffering terribly? She said, oh my gosh, you're right. I don't want to press that magic button. That would be terrible. But now she's in a paradox. She wants to get better. She's been praying to God every night for 9 years to make these symptoms go away. She can't stand suffering any longer. And at the same time, she sees that all of her feelings are actually beautiful things that motivate her to do everything for her daughter and show beautiful things about her. And then we resolve it with what I call the magic dial. I said, instead of pressing a magic button and making them go away, suppose we could dial them down a little bit. How depressed would you want to be at the end of the session tonight? And she says, oh, 10%. I said, you want to go from 100 to 10. Could I sell you on 20? And now I'm trying to talk her into more depression. She said, no, 10 is plenty. And then she wanted to be 5% anxious. And, 5% in this emotion and 0% in that. And now that she's dialed things down, I've made a deal with her subconscious mind that she can save face and just work to reduce the feelings, not make them disappear entirely, which is a nutty sounding proposition. And then once I did that, paradoxically, it was really easy for her to talk back to her negative thoughts, like it's my fault uh, that she got shot. I never should have let her go out and play. And then she could suddenly see, well, gosh, that's nutty. How was I supposed to know? I can't predict the future. And I let her go out and play every night for years. That's what a loving mother does. And she was able to crush the rest of her negative thoughts. And one of her thoughts was, oh, the people in the audience here are probably judging me and thinking I'm a bad mother. And that's mind reading. That's another distortion. And at the end, I said, why would you want to ask them? And she got real scared. And she said, oh, no, do I have to? I said, well, you don't have to, but how are you going to find out unless you ask them? She said, oh, they wouldn't be honest with me. I said, there's another, you're predicting the future again. You don't know that. They might be honest, or they might just blow smoke in your face. Why don't you ask them? And then you can ask them if they're telling you the truth. She says, I think I'm going to do it. And she said, if any of you would walk up to the microphone and I want to ask you some questions. And 10 people rushed up and got in line. And she asked them one at a time, are you judging me? Do you think I'm a bad mother? And every one of them, male and female, when they would respond, they started sobbing and saying, Karen, you're my hero. To get up in front of a huge audience and share something so personal, I just think you're a beautiful mother, a beautiful human being. And when she heard these things, each time she started sobbing. She couldn't believe what people were saying to her. And that's what I mean, the truth shall set you free, that when you see the truth it's mind-blowing. At the end of the session, not only did all of her feelings go to zero, but she estimated one of them, I think her guilt, she said, went to minus 1,000. And she said her frustration went to minus 1,000,000. I mean, she was in a state of ecstasy, not somewhat less depressed, which was what it was like when I was giving out bucketfuls of antidepressants. It's like a total, what I aim for is a total obliteration of depression, and it usually happens in a single therapy session, not after months or years of treatment, although I see people for 2 hours because it takes me 2 hours to make that miracle happen for somebody. But that was it. And afterwards, she got the video. A friend of mine just recorded it amateurishly on his cell phone or something like that, and I gave her the video, and she watched it with her daughter. And her daughter didn't know her mom was depressed the whole time also. And then her daughter magically recovered. And then Karen emailed me just recently, which was like 4 years after that session. And she said, I've had no more therapy since then. The work we did was mind-blowing. My daughter just is doing tremendous as well. She just finished graduate school, got a clinical social work license, and got married. But it shows how her symptoms were the expression of what was right with her, what was beautiful about her. And once she saw that, her shame disappeared. And she was listening to what her symptoms were telling her. And once she got the message, she didn't need those symptoms anymore. But it happens just about every time now when I treat someone, that they come in at the beginning of the session with horrible depression, generally, often decades of failed therapy for depression. And after I do this positive reframing, suddenly their symptoms get better, but they become open to the idea of rapid recovery.
So explain a little bit more. You said once she got the message, then she didn't need the symptoms anymore. So
yeah. See, her symptoms were telling her things. Her depression was telling her how much she loved her daughter. And her anxiety was motivating her to do everything things she could do to protect her daughter. She let her guard down that one time, and her daughter got shot. Now she's going to be very vigilant. Her anxiety is not a symptom of a mental illness. It's her mothering telling her, let's be vigilant and do everything we can do to help Ashley. And her shame and her guilt were showing her that she has high standards, and that she's accountable, and that she's a humble person. And that she's looking within to see what did I do wrong? What do I need to learn from this? You see, once you view your symptoms as really positive, beautiful things, then you don't need to be obsessing about them anymore. You've gotten the gift that they're trying to give you. And in addition, once you see that your symptoms are the expression of what's right with you, an expression of your core values as a human being, it's kind of hard to be believing, I'm a bad mother, when you're suddenly seeing what a beautiful mother you are.
Right. Right. So that's sort of a deep topic, because is it that the purpose of the symptoms are these messages, or are the symptoms just there, but there's a way that we can pull positive messages from those symptoms?
Well, there are positive messages within the symptoms, and once you see those positive messages, that what they're showing about you that's positive and awesome, it shifts your perspective, and you no longer feel like someone with a brain disorder.
Right.
Maybe it's just a little too much of a good thing, so we can tune it down a little bit, but you're not trying to correct something that's basically defective about yourself. I had another colleague the other day who's actually one of the team therapists that I trained, a man who has had at times in his life episodes of panic and anxiety because so-called approval addiction. And he said, he grew up in Hong Kong. He learned how to please his mother and was always trying to please his mother. And he says when he came out as a gay man in his 20s, it's the first time he did something, not for approval. And he had tremendous panic and then got over it. And his mother wanted him to be a chemical or an electrical engineer because he lisped a little bit. He always thought he wanted to be a shrink of some kind, but she told him, "Oh, you can't do that because you don't talk well, but you can become an electrical engineer." So he did, and then they moved to U.S. He was actually one of those an undocumented immigrant, but he made it big in Silicon Valley, and he's a real smart guy, but he wasn't happy, and so the second time he kind of came out. He said, "I'm going to give up my career and I'm going to get a social work degree because I want to treat people. I want to help people. I want to follow my dream." And so he gave up his career and went to a very inferior kind of a not flashy university, but where he could get a master's degree in clinical social work as fast as possible. And then he started coming to my Tuesday group, and he blossomed into a brilliant therapist. Like myself, he decided to work with immigrants and people who with little going for themselves, people like himself, and he found that he could get people with horrible problems, often who didn't even speak English, recovered in 3 or 4 40-minute sessions just using these new techniques. And then recently he did his final coming out. He decided to give up this job he had at a clinic, which was security and kind of prestige in a way, and just start his own clinical practice and work with people who don't have enough money, don't have enough resources, and spend half his time just living his life. And he got panicky again because he's not doing the approved thing. And he came to me and his thought was, I shouldn't be anxious again. I should have gotten over this in childhood, and I'm a high-powered mental health professional, so I shouldn't be anxious. So again, he's telling himself, my anxiety shows there's something wrong with me. Do you see that? And he's
Right.
struggling against the anxiety. And the moment came in his session when he suddenly saw that his anxiety wasn't because of what's wrong with him, but because of what's right with him. Can you see it?
Right. Yes. Right.
You do?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
What do you see?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Well, if
Let's
you can
see.
get it, great. If you don't, great. We have a philosophy of learning through joyous failure.
Right. So the anxiety, it's what's the positive message in the anxiety? What does it say that's positive about him? Is that the question?
Yeah, positive and awesome. Why is his anxiety a mind-blowing, wonderful thing that he can be incredibly proud of, not ashamed of?
You got me. I said yes, but you got me.
Well, it was because do you see the fact that he's anxious again, having panic again, shows that again he's doing what he wants to do rather than the approved thing.
Right.
Do you see? So
Right.
he
Yeah.
needs
So the
to
anxiety.
celebrate. Uh,
Right.
yeah, I'm confronting my fears yet again. I'm moving up to a higher level. And when I
Right.
said that during his session, he suddenly saw it like a light bulb went on in his brain, and he was instantly cured.
Right. So the anxiety is a sign that he's moving out of his comfort zone into
Yeah,
basically creating his own life away
yeah,
from expectations of other
yeah.
people.
It
Right.
shows he's a man of courage and conviction.
Right. Wow.
It's so cool. But you think he could have seen it because he's one of the top therapists, I would say, in Northern California, if not the world. And yet when you get into it yourself, you get lost and you can't quite see it, and you need someone to point you in a new direction, looking at things from a different perspective. And
If
it just
if someone out there, so this points to the need often of finding a good CBT therapist. Any advice for someone out there who wants to find a good therapist? How to, because there's
yeah,
so
buy
many
my
out there.
books instead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's why I wrote Feeling Good, because I wanted the common person, the average person, to have access to these techniques. There were only about a dozen CBT therapists in the world when I wrote Feeling Good, and was published in 1980. And now there's just a small number of these team therapists. You can go to my website, feelinggood.com, and find a referral page, and you can find tons of free resources at my website. All the podcasts. I've done over 200 podcasts on all these new ideas, and a lot of people every day email me and say, "Wow, your podcasts have cured me." But I wrote the new book, Feeling Great, for the same reason I wrote Feeling Good, so people could use these techniques yourself. And if you need the help of a therapist, there's no shame in that at all. But I think the new techniques, like the techniques in Feeling Good, people can, they did research on Feeling Good, psychology researchers, and reported that 50 to 65% of the people, if you just hand them a copy of Feeling Good, will recover in 4 weeks with no other treatment. No pills, no psychotherapy. And it's my hope that the new book, Feeling Great, will have that same effect. But certainly some people will need a therapist. And uh, sometimes, like today, as we work together, I helped you see that thing about Sonny, and I helped him see that thing. And sometimes a therapist can speed this process for sure. I'm also working on an app with about 4 really nice and super talented people. I'm trying to create an electronic version of myself so that people can get it all electronically. It's not live or anything, but it's like kind of a synthetic David that will guide people through not only how to crush the distortions, but this positive reframing uh, process. And again, we'll have to see how effective it is. But and if anyone's listening and wants to be a beta tester, just go to my website, feelinggood.com/app. Okay, yeah, sure, yeah, and then you can tell me what you think, and we're trying to figure it out. I got we have a new guy on our team that we hired as a consultant. He's from Southern California, And he's kind of a consultant on how to make things dramatic, but not phony, but dramatic and exciting. He looked at some of the script and he says, this is brilliant, but boring. And so we're going to meet with him tomorrow and try to find out how to bring the stories to life with tears and laughter, and so it will excite people, because you've got to capture people's attention. So he's going to help us with that.
David, quick question
tomorrow.
before I let you go, and because you brought up what's called bibliotherapy, which is
Yeah.
giving a client a book and having
Yeah.
happy to therapy, and so many people got better after reading your book. The question I had with that is, with that study, did they compare that against giving the clients other self-help books? So was
Yep.
it?
Yeah, they did actually. They did did about 10 consecutive controlled outcome studies that they published in the top psychology journals and some medical journals. But originally they compared, they used both my book Feeling Good and a book by Peter Lewinson called Up from Depression. And both had good antidepressant effects, but the reading level of Feeling Good, they said, was much more favorable to people. That sometimes books have too many big words, and so they said that the Feeling Good seems to be getting the better effect. So, but they published that either of those books was really kind of curing depression for 50 to 60% of the people they handed them to. These were people who came to a medical center, University of Alabama Medical Center, requesting treatment. And they said, oh, you've got to be on a waiting list for 4 weeks. But in the meantime, read this book. And they gave half of the patients, my book Feeling Good or the Lewinson book, and half were on the waiting list. The people they gave one of the books to recovered, 50 to 65% of them. The people on the waiting list didn't recover. Then they took the people on the waiting list and said, now you got to wait another 4 weeks, but in the meantime, read one of these books. And then 50 to 65% of them recovered. So they published that. And then the people at the National Institute of Mental Health said this might have been a placebo effect. Like maybe any book would do the same thing. So then they did another fairly large study, and they gave half the patients my book Feeling Good and half the patients the Viktor Frankl book Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
And what would happen in 4 weeks. And again, they got the same result with Feeling Good. 50 to 65% of the patients recovered or no longer needed treatment. They improved substantially, but there was no improvement in the Viktor Frankl book. So they decided the book has to actually have tools or techniques or something that will actually have antidepressant effects. It's not just the effect of reading. Reading alone does not cause depression to go away.
I am so glad I asked you that question then, because the way you explained it just now is backed up with so much science. Right?
Yeah,
so many studies, because I just had someone on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, no, self-help books don't work. The greatest prediction of who's going to buy a self-help book is someone who's already bought a self-help book, which infers that self-help books don't work. So I'm very happy to.
Well, I think most of them don't work. I didn't write Feeling Good as a self-help book. I never thought it was a self-help book. I was just excited, and I thought it would be helpful for people in therapy to speed up. They could read between sessions, and the therapist wouldn't have to explain about distortions and everything. But when I see self-help books in bookstores, I practically vomit. And you read them, and you read a couple sentences, and they're so fakey sounding. You can tell from the tone of voice. So I think your guest, had some ideas there that were, had a lot of truth to them.
Right. And again, though, it was a bit of a overgeneralization.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah,
everyone wants to be an expert. Very few people say, I don't know. I almost said I don't know on the amygdala thing. I really don't know about that amygdala thing.
All right. So if you're on YouTube land, I'm pointing to his book, Feeling Great. Out there in podcast world, definitely go to Amazon, get his book, Feeling Great, and probably Feeling Good too. any other courses or books or resources you want to share with the audience?
Well, there's a lot on my website, feelinggood.com. There's a free depression class that has about, I think, 18 lessons, about half an hour each, 45 minutes each. There's a free anxiety class with shows how to recover from pretty much every single anxiety disorder, OCD and phobias and social anxiety. And I think we were planning on a relationship class. I don't know if it's been published yet, but there's just a lot of free resources there because so many people don't have money, not even just because of the pandemic. That's made it worse, but even before the pandemic, people in the US and around the world, and they can't find a good therapist in your area, and you're hurting and you'd like to do something about it. Well, or you're like in India, we're getting a lot of fans in India now, but they have very little money. So you can go and start listening to the Feeling Good podcast. There's a search function. So if you have a special interest like social anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder or relationship problems, you can just put the search function and all the podcasts on a particular topic will come up, and you can listen to them. And there's a lot of healing there and learning. And it's for therapists too. And then I have for Bay Area therapists free training at Stanford every week. Bay Area therapists can come and get unlimited therapy for the rest of your life for free and unlimited training for the rest of your life for free. And now we're starting a second weekly group for therapists from outside of the Bay Area. So if you're in Mumbai or, London or New York, you can still come to our weekly training group. It'll be a Wednesday group in 9 to 11 West Coast time. And anyway, my goal is to bring free or super inexpensive healing to as many people as possible. And once we get the Feeling Great app going and we see that it's really working for people, we'll have to charge something for it, because I have a lot of super high-powered people creating it, and they have to survive. But I think we'll also always have a function. If you want this app and you can't use it, then it's yours for free type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I know Sam Harris does that with his.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. Yep. All right, David. Hey, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for writing these books. And yeah, thanks again. It was great.
Okay. Have a good one. My pleasure. Hope we can hang out again one of these days. Bye-bye.
Sounds great. Bye-bye.